Picture this: Rome, with its unparalleled discipline, its paved roads, and centuries of deeply entrenched centralized power, pitted against the Mongols, an empire defined by blistering speed, devastating bows, and the kind of sheer, terrifying momentum that swept across entire continents in just a few decades. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to explore the ultimate historical fantasy clash. If these two absolute titans of history met on the exact same battlefield, who would actually walk away the winner? Okay, let's dive into this, because this isn't just about picking a favorite team. We're really looking at two completely divergent philosophies of war, of logistics, and of empire building, and we're asking what happens when an unstoppable force literally meets an immovable object. To answer who wins, we've got to break down exactly how they fought, how they kept their troops supplied, and crucially, where this fight is actually taking place. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by meeting the empires, then we'll compare their tactics and tech, examine their logistics, run 3 different battlefield simulations, deliver the final verdict, and then finally, we'll explore the hidden factors that actually win wars. All right, let's move to part 1 and see how this builds. Meet the empires, defining the contenders. Now, to keep things fair, when we talk about the Roman Empire in this matchup, we're looking specifically at the 1st and 2nd century CE Principate, basically the absolute height of standard Roman military organization. We are talking about a massive territorial footprint that stretched all the way from Britain to the Middle East, entirely secured by a professional standing army. Their whole system relied on highly disciplined citizen legions, combined arms cohorts, and the devastating, brutal efficiency of heavy infantry that was custom-built to hold ground and crush opponents in close quarters. And in the other corner, our Mongol Empire contender is the 13th century expansion force under Genghis Khan and his successor, Ogedei. This was the era of their massive, honestly unprecedented expansion across Eurasia. And their military philosophy? It was almost the exact opposite of Rome's. They were famous for highly mobile, cavalry-based armies that relied heavily on mounted archers. They totally mastered decentralized steppe mobility. They would strike with terrifying speed, moving faster than any contemporary army even thought was physically possible. Which brings us to part 2. Tactics and technology, the tale of the tape. And this brilliantly illustrates their core differences. Just look at the troops. Rome relies on heavily armored infantry, while the Mongols are almost entirely cavalry. For command structure, Rome is all about those strictly organized, drilled cohorts that maintain really tight formations under immense pressure. The Mongols, though, they use the tumen, a decentralized unit that could splinter off into smaller raiding parties and then rapidly recombine out of nowhere. And for tactics, Rome wants a set-piece battle using combined arms. The Mongols are absolute masters of psychological warfare, staging massive arrow volleys and executing these incredibly complex, feigned retreats just to pull their enemies out of formation. But before we just assume Roman heavy armor makes them invincible, let's take a quick detour. Here's a genuinely surprising fact for you. Mongol composite recurve bows fired arrows that could actually penetrate medieval armor at close range. So while that famous Roman articulated plate armor, the lorica segmentata, is incredibly strong and fantastic against slashing swords, it simply wasn't designed to take a constant, raining barrage of high-velocity mounted arrow fire. Let's actually look a bit closer at those specific loadouts. The Roman soldier is basically outfitted for a grueling grind. They've got the pilum to break enemy shields, the short gladius for brutal close-quarter stabbing, and heavy mail or plate armor for maximum protection. The Mongol rider, on the other hand, is geared entirely for mobility and reach. They have the composite recurve bow to strike from a safe distance, a curved saber for slashing on horseback, and much lighter lamellar and leather armor. Put simply, Rome wants to get in close and push you around. The Mongols want to stay well out of reach and bleed you dry. Now, a super common assumption is that the Mongols were strictly open-field fighters, and they'd be totally helpless against Roman walls and forts. Actually, not true at all. The Mongols were incredibly fast learners. As they expanded into China and Persia, they captured advanced siege expertise, directly employed foreign siege engineers, and utilized massive counterweight trebuchets. They adapted to walled cities amazingly fast, which means Rome couldn't just hide behind a wall and assume they were perfectly safe. All right, part 3, logistics and sustainability. How did they actually fuel the war machine? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast in how these two armies stayed alive. Rome's logistics sustainability is just a high, steady, maxed-out line. We're talking paved roads, massive granaries, and continental supply chains moving grain and oil over vast distances. The Mongols, however, max out entirely on mobility. They didn't rely on slow supply wagons from back home. They relied on horse fodder, foraging, and basically living off the land. They spiked in speed and rapid movement, though they definitely faced dips in sustainability if they got bogged down in prolonged static sieges. And this difference stems directly from their economies. Rome was an administrative behemoth, right? A huge provincial tax base and massive urban populations meant grain flowed steadily to feed millions. But if they lost a legion, replacing it took very slow, deliberate training. The Mongol economy was totally different. It was fueled by rapid mobilization, utilizing tribal networks, and extracting vast wealth and manpower through tribute and plunder. Rome could sustain a frontier garrison for centuries. The Mongols could field massive armies seemingly overnight, but always at the constant risk of overextending themselves. Okay, moving on to part 4. 3 battlefield simulations, the arenas. To judge this fairly, we have to recognize that environment basically dictates victory. So we're going to run this clash through 3 distinct geographic arenas: the open steppe, the mixed terrain of the Mediterranean, and finally, the grueling grind of siege warfare and walled cities. Match 1 takes place on the open steppe. Imagine huge, seemingly endless plains with limitless room to maneuver. In this environment, the Mongols have a massive advantage. Their mobility, their horse archery, and those devastating encirclement tactics would completely dominate an open field. The slow-moving Roman heavy infantry column would just be flanked and showered with arrows. Now, sure, Romans were brilliant engineers, and they could buy some time by hastily digging fortified squares around their baggage trains. But without cavalry parity to actually chase the Mongols down, they're effectively sitting ducks in an ocean of grass. On the steppe, the Mongols take the win. But let's look at match 2, which shifts to the Mediterranean coast, mixed terrain. We're talking coastal hills, narrow roads, hedges, walled towns. Suddenly, this matchup is much closer to even. Here, the Romans can heavily utilize their fortified towns, their established supply bases, and crucially, their naval support for constant resupply. The Mongols could certainly try to adapt, but their primary advantage, that sweeping mobility, is severely neutralized by broken ground and urban choke points. When you take away the Mongols' ability to outmaneuver, the Roman heavy infantry and local supply chains become a brutal, unyielding wall. And here's a really fascinating little fact to consider across any terrain. Both of these empires were brilliant at bypassing combat entirely by using political strategy. During sieges, the Mongols frequently offered negotiated surrenders, specifically guaranteeing the safety of local artisans so they could preserve the city's economic and siege efficiency for their own future campaigns. Similarly, Romans frequently allowed local autonomy to cities that just cooperated without a fight. They both knew the easiest battle to win is the one you don't actually have to fight. Which brings us to part 5, the final verdict. Who actually wins this thing? So the crucial point here is that there really is no single simple answer. A real-world clash is entirely dependent on geography. On the open steppe, the Mongols win cleanly. In mixed terrain, it's a draw or it's highly conditional based on local supply lines. But in sustained sieges and defensive fortified attrition warfare, Rome wins. If this war actually happened, we'd be looking at a hybrid outcome. The Mongols would likely rapidly conquer the open Roman borderlands for sure, but Rome would firmly hold its heavily fortified, naval-supplied Mediterranean core. Which brings us to the major twist of this entire explainer. When we compare legendary armies, we tend to get totally obsessed with weapons and tactics. But the historical truth is summed up perfectly by this quote right here. The team with better logistics and political control often determines victory more than the sharper sword. The real winner isn't decided in a single afternoon of combat. It's decided by the massive systems backing them up. And that transitions us nicely to part 6, the hidden deciding factors, the stuff beyond the battlefield. These are the underappreciated factors that actually changed the course of history. Roman cities had incredible sanitation, aqueducts, and administrative tax recording, which gave them profound urban resilience. Mongol conquests, by contrast, were shockingly fast but often caused immense population disruption and even famine. Furthermore, invisible forces like disease and contagion can decimate an army way faster than a shower of arrows or a wall of shields. Armies might win the war, but pandemics, food supply, and local governance, those are the things that actually decide if an empire gets to keep the land they just bled for. Because ultimately, empires are complex, living systems, not just a collection of soldiers. While the Mongols dominate the rapid, open campaign, Rome is the absolute master of defense, engineering, and sustained centuries-long governance. It's literally a clash of total mobility versus total infrastructure. I want to pass the question over to you now. Which of our three battlefield matchups surprised you the most today? The steppe, mixed terrain, or the sieges? Take a moment to think about it, drop your thoughts in the comments, and keep exploring the incredible complexities of history.